Good evening, my fellow citizen. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation in that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other to provide a nuclear strikes capability against the Western Hemisphere. Upon receiving the first preliminarily hard information of this nature last Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., I directed that our surveillance be stepped up, and having now confirmed and completed our evaluation of the evidence and our decision on a course of action, this government feels obliged to report this new crisis to you in fullest detail. The characteristic of this new missile site indicate two distinct type of installation. Several of them include a medium-range ballistic missiles capable of carrying a nuclear warheads for a distance more than 1,000 nautical miles. Each of these missiles, in short, is capable of striking Washington, D.C., Panama Canal, Cape Canaveral, Mexico City, or any other city in the southeastern part of the United States, in Central America, or in the Caribbean area. Additional site has not yet completed appear to be designed for intermediate range ballistic missile capable of traveling more than twice as far and thus capable of striking most of the major cities in the Western Hemisphere, ranging as far as north as Hudson Bay, Canada, and as far as south as Lima, Peru. In addition, jet bombers capable of carrying nuclear weapons are now being uncrated and assembled in Cuba, while the necessary air bases are being prepared. This urgent transformation of Cuba into an important strategic base by the presence of these large, long range, and clearly offensive weapons of sudden mass destruction constitute an explicit threat to the peace and security of all the Americas. In flagrant and deliberate defiance of the Riot Pact of 1947, the tradition to this nation and hemisphere, the joint resolution of the 87th Congress, the Charter of the United Nations, and my own public warnings to the Soviet on September 4 and 13. This action is also contradicts the repeated assurance of Soviet spokesman, both publicly and privately delivered, that the armed buildup in Cuba would retain its original defensive character, and the Soviet Union had no need to desire to station strategic missiles on territory in any other nation. The size of its undertaking makes clear that it's been planned for some months. Yet only last month after I made clear the distinction between any introduction or ground-to-ground missile and the existence of defensive anti-aircraft missiles, the Soviet government stated on September 11, then, and I quote, the government publicly stated that the armaments and military equipment sent to Cuba are designed exclusively for defensive purposes. That, and I quote the Soviet government, there is no need for the Soviet government to shift its weapon for a retaliatory blow to any other country, for instance, Cuba, and that, I quote, their government, the Soviet Union has so powerful rockets to carry these nuclear warheads that there is no need to research for sites for them beyond the boundaries of Soviet Union. That statement was false. Only last Tuesday, as evidence of this rapid offensive buildup was already in my hand, Soviet Foreign Minister Gromyko told me in my office that he was instructed To make it clear once again, as he said, his government had already done, that Soviet assistance to Cuba, and I quote, pursued solely for the purpose of contributing to the defense capabilities of Cuba, that, and I quote him, training by Soviet specialties of Cuban nationals in handling defensive armament was no meant offensive and it were otherwise. Mr. Gromyko went on, the Soviet government would never become involved in rendering such an assistance. That statement was also false. Neither the United States of America nor the world community of nations can tolerate deliberate deception and offensive threats on the part of any nation, large or small. We no longer live in a world where the only actual firing of weapons represent an efficient challenge to a national security to constitute maximum peril. Nuclear weapons are so destructive and ballistic missiles are so swift that any substantially increased possibility of their use or any sudden change in their deployment may well be regarded as a definite threat to peace. For many years, both of the Soviet Union and the United States, recognizing this fact, have deployed strategic nuclear weapons with great care, never upsetting the precarious status quo, which ensured that these weapons would not be used in absence of some vital challenge. Our own strategic missile had never been transferred to the territory of any other nation under a cloak of secrecy, and the territory of any other nation and others' deception. And our history, unlike that of the Soviet Union since the end of World War II, demonstrate that we had no desire to dominate or conquer any other nation or impose our system upon its people. Nevertheless, American citizens had become adjusted to living daily on the bullseyes of the Soviet missile located inside the USSR or in submarines. In that sense, missiles in Cuba add to an already clear and present danger. Although it should be noted the nation of Latin America never previously had been subjected to a potential nuclear threat. But this secret is swift and extraordinary. Buildup of the communist missile in an area well known to have a special historical relationship to the United States and a nation of the Western Hemisphere, in violation of Soviet assurance and in defiance of American and hemispheric policy. This sudden, clandestine decision to station strategic weapon for the first time outside of Soviet soil is a deliberately provocative and unjustified change in the status quo which cannot be accepted by this country. If our courage and our commitments are to be trusted again by either friend or foe. The 1930s taught us a lesson. Aggressive conduct, if allowed to go unchecked and unchallenged, ultimately leads to war. This nation is opposed to war. We are also true to our word. Our unswerving objective, therefore, must be to prevent the use of this missile against this in any other country, and to secure the withdrawal or elimination of the Western Hemisphere. Our policy has been one of patience and restraint, as befits a peaceful and powerful nation which lead a worldwide alliance. We have been determined not to be diverted from our central concern by mere irritants and fanatics. But now further action is required, and it is underway. And these action may not be the beginning. We will not be prematurely or unnecessarily risk the costs of worldwide nuclear war, which even the fruits of victory would be ashes in our mouth. But neither will we shrink from that risk at any time, it must be faced. Acting, therefore, in the defense of our own security and of the entire Western Hemisphere, and under the authority entrusted to me by the Constitution as endorsed by the resolution of the Congress, I have directed that the following initial step be taken immediately. First, to halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine of all offensive military and equipment under shipment to Cuba has been initiated. All ship of any kind bound for Cuba from whatever country or nation or port will, if found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back. This quarantine will be extended, if needed, to other types of cargoes and carrier. We are not at this time, however, denying the necessities of life as the Soviets attempted to do their Berlin blockage of 1948. Second, I have directed the continued and increased close surveillance of Cuba and its military buildup. The Foreign Minister of the OAS in their communique of October 6 rejected secrecy on such matter in this hemisphere. Should these offensive military preparations continue, thus increasing the threats to the hemisphere, further action would be justified. I have directed the armed force to prepare any eventualities, and I trust that in the interest of both Cuban people and the Soviet technician at the sites, the hazard to all concerned of continuing this threat will be recognized. Third, it shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launch from Cuba against any nation of the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full territorial response upon the Soviet Union. Fourth, as a necessary militant precaution, I have reinforced our base in Guantanamo, evacuated today the dependents of our personnel there, and ordered additional military units to be at standby alert basis. Fifth, we're calling tonight for an immediate meeting of organ of Constellation under the Organization of American States to consider this threat to hemispheric security and to invoke Articles 6 and 8 of the Rio Treaty in support of all necessary action. The United Nations Charter allows for regional security arrangement, and the United Nations of this hemisphere decided long ago against the military presence of outside worlds and powers. Our other allies around the world have also been alerted. Sixth, under the Charter of the United Nations, we're asking tonight that an emergency meeting of the Security Council be convoked without delay to take action against this latest Soviet threats to world peace. Our resolution will call for the prompt dismantling and withdrawal of all the offensive weapons in Cuba under the supervision of the UN observers before the quarantine can be lifted. Seventh, and finally, I call upon Chairman Khrushchev to halt and eliminate this clandestine, reckless, and provocative threats to world peace and to stable relation between our two nations. I call upon him further to abandon this course of world domination and to join in a historic effort to end the perilous arms race and to transform the history of man. He has an opportunity now to move the world back from the abyss of destruction by returning to his government's own word that it had no need to station missiles outside its own territory, and withdrawing these weapons from Cuba by refraining from any action which will widen or deepen the present crisis, and then by participating in search for peaceful and permanent absolution. This nation is prepared to present its case against the Soviet threats to peace and our own proposal for a peaceful world at any time in any forum in the OAS, in the United Nations, or in any other meeting that could be useful. without limiting our freedom of action. We have in the past made strenuous efforts to limit the spreads of nuclear weapons. We have proposed the elimination of all arms and prepared to discuss a new proposal for a removal of our tension on both sides, including the possibilities of genuinely independent Cuba, free to determine its own destiny. We had no wish to war with Soviet Union, for we are a peaceful people who desire to live in peace with all those other people. But it is difficult to settle or even discuss with all these problems in an atmosphere of intimidation. This is why this latest Soviet threat or any other earlier threats which is made either independently or in response of our action this week must will be met with determination. Any hostile move anywhere in the world against the safety and freedom of peoples to whom are committed, including in particular the brave people of West Berlin, will be met by whatever action is needed. Finally, I want to say a few words to the captive people of Cuba, to whom this speech is being directly carried by special radio facilities. I speak to you as a friend, as one who knows you deeply attached to justice, to your fatherland, and all who share your aspiration for liberty. And I have watched, and the American people has watched with deep sorrow how your nationalist revolution was betrayed, and how your fatherland fell under foreign domination. Now your leaders are no longer Cuban leaders inspired by Cuban ideals. They're all puppets and agents of an international conspiracy which turned Cuba against your friends and your neighbors in the Americas and turned it into a first Latin American country to become a target for nuclear war. The first American country to have these weapons on its soil. These new weapons are not in your interest. They contribute nothing to your peace and well being. They can only undermine it. When this country has no wish to cause you suffer or impose any system upon you, we know that your life and land are being used as pawn by those who deny your freedom. Many times in the past, the Cuban people have risen to throw out tyrants who destroy their liberty. And I have no doubt that most Cubans today look forward to the time when they will truly form foreign domination, free to choose their own leaders, free to select their own system, free to own their own land, free to speak and write and worship without fear or degradation. And then shall Cuba welcome back to the Society of Free Nation and to the Association of Nations of this hemisphere. My fellow citizen, let no one doubt that this is a difficult and dangerous effort on which we have set out. No one can foresee precisely what course it will take or what cause of casualty will be incurred. Many months of sacrifice and self discipline lie ahead, months in which both our patience and our will be tested. Threats and denunciation will keep us aware from our danger, but the greater danger in all would be to do nothing. The path we have chosen for the present is full of hazard, as all paths are, but it is the most consistent with our character and courage as a nation of our commitments around the world. The cost of the cost of freedom is always high, but Americans has always paid it. and one path shall never be chosen, and that is the path of surrender or submission. Our goal is not the victory of might, but the vindication of right, not peace at the expense of freedom, but both peace and freedom here in this hemisphere, and we hope around the world, God willing, that goal will be achieved. Thank you and good night.